Hyvä. Kiitoksia ja hyvää aamupäivää munkin puolesta. I will present in English today, so I'll just start. So I'm Ilkka Kärrylä, and I'm a political historian originally, but now at the moment I'm actually working at the Center for Nordic Studies in the Faculty of Arts, University of Helsinki. So this is kind of a area and cultural studies center concentrating in the Nordic countries. And I will talk about the research project that I'm in at the moment and what I am researching in that project. So this is called Neoliberalism in the Nordics, and this is a quite large research program, 6 years running from the beginning of 2020 until the end of 2025, and it's funded by Riksbanken's Jubileumsfond, which is the foundation of the Swedish Central Bank. And the program leader is Professor Jenny Andersson from Uppsala University, from the History of Ideas and Science department. And this program consists of eight universities in the Nordic countries and some 20 researchers, so professors and senior researchers and some postdocs like myself. And there's also the web page of the program if you're interested in. But so maybe just first to give a very brief definition of what neoliberalism is, or what we mean by it in the program. It's basically a political ideology which believes that the market mechanism should have a prevalent role in society and in arranging social relations. And often in everyday discourse, people seem to think that neoliberalism somehow pursues a minimal state, or is kind of against state power. But in fact, these neoliberal thinkers and the actual practices that have been influenced by neoliberalism actually emphasize the role of the state in creating markets and upholding them and creating the rules and kind of the context where markets can operate efficiently. So that is a slight difference between the kind of scholarly definition and everyday discourse about neoliberalism. So what this research program intends to do, this is taken from the research plan. The program intends to develop an understanding of neoliberalism in the Nordic welfare states, and specifically of the role of the welfare state and social democracy, not merely as the targets of neoliberal critique, but as the vehicles of a specific Nordic variant of neoliberalism. So it has often been argued that there has not been so much neoliberalism or this kind of market thinking and market ideology in the Nordic countries, because we have the welfare state and we still have the welfare state. But in fact, as recent research argues, neoliberalism is not a monolith or just some clearly defined ideology and policy package that either is adopted or not, but it's a gradual process, and it takes very different forms in different parts of the world. So in the Nordic countries, neoliberal ideas and practices have in fact transformed the welfare state, and welfare state institutions have been used to promote this kind of market thinking. Or, for example, corporatist labor market institutions have been used and transformed. So some of the key themes in the project are studying neoliberalism as a concept, and as a set of political and economic ideas, kind of an intellectual history approach, but also how these ideas have been put into practice in different ways. And then we look at different networks and alliances and elite positions that have promoted neoliberal ideas, or that have been involved in their promotion, and that have taken these influences, adopted these influences. And then one strand in the program is also neoliberalism as lived experience and everyday practice. So, for example, how ideas like that everyone should invest in stock saving for ordinary citizens, how that has been promoted, or credit cards, or like other kinds of financial practices and financialization in general. So that's especially something that some of the Swedish researchers in the program are doing. But then now I will briefly tell what I am studying in the program. So one paper that I have written with Professor Johan Strang, who is the leader of the Finnish part of the program, and then Maiju Vuokko from University of Turku. We have written kind of this general story about liberalism and liberalization in Finland, because regarding Finland, first of all we have to explain why liberalism has been weaker, at least as kind of an organized political movement or party political movement. It has been weaker in Finland than in the other Nordic countries. Perhaps Norway resembles Finland to some extent, but in Denmark and Sweden, liberalism has been much stronger. So there are some general factors that can explain this, of course. For example, Finland modernized later than Sweden and Denmark, and the urban elites and middle classes also developed later, or they were relatively weak. So there was not kind of mass base for liberal politics, or similar kind of demographic base as in Sweden and Denmark. In Finland, the conservatives and agrarian party and socialist parties have been the strong ones, and liberals not so much, even though the other parties have adopted many liberal ideas in course of history. And in Finland also, perhaps partly because of this kind of a latecomer mentality, there has been a quite prevalent belief that the state has to take a big role in modernizing the country, and for example in industrialization and these kinds of issues, and the state has in general been viewed quite positively in Finland, like more positively than in many liberal traditions. And also the civil society has been strongly linked to the state, which is of course the case more or less in all of the Nordic countries. And then also Finland's geopolitical position has had some influence in this. During the Cold War, it seems that also because the Finnish foreign policy or the main policy line was to maintain good relations with the Soviet Union. So this seems to have made it more difficult to adopt very liberal ideas, especially market liberal ideas, which is in fact a bit curious because the Soviets were not very interested in what kind of ideological positions the Finns take, or they were not even that interested in if we liberalize our markets. They were just interested in, do we participate in Western and like European and North Atlantic integration and cooperation or not. So that was the thing for them, but not markets, which is evident, for example, in the fact that when we liberalized finance markets in the 1980s, the Soviets did not have anything to say really about that. So, but it seems that Finnish politicians often thought that they have to be careful also in these liberalization measures. But another factor in the geopolitical position is also that Finland has not been so closely related to the Anglo-American world, or the influences from there have not been as strong as to the other Nordic countries. Especially Denmark has usually been the first one to adopt influences from Anglo-American countries, also these neoliberal ideas. Finland has been more oriented to Germany and Russia, so Soviet Union, and of course Sweden. But then the ideas perhaps have often come there with a bit of a lag. But then Finland has then gradually liberalized in many respects, especially from the 1980s onwards. And the first big reform was the liberalization of finance markets. But then in the 1990s also many and after that many other sectors have been liberalized. And also the welfare state has been marketized, for example by introducing private service providers and outsourcing the production of public services, which has been a big trend in all of the Nordic countries. And then perhaps a more cultural thing, but first signs of this liberalization in the 1980s was also this birth of a new urban culture and this yuppie movement, for example. They didn't have a very clear political ideology except this general ethos of individualism and also free markets, but it was not very ideologically coherent movement, but still a significant new thing emerging. So then another theme that I myself have been studying are the conservative parties in Finland and Sweden, and comparing their programs, ideologies and policies. So I have looked at this, especially at published party programs, and tried to make a systematic comparison on when different neoliberal ideas have been or have first appeared in the programs, and based on this comparison, it's clear that the Swedish conservatives adopted these ideas much earlier, or already in the 1970s. Many of them deregulation of many sectors of society. For example, finance markets in Sweden, the Conservative Party openly called for deregulation or liberalization of finance markets already in the 1970s. The Finnish conservatives did not do that, but still the finance markets were liberalized at about the same time in both countries. of course, the conservatives also, they were not even in government in the 1980s when this finance market liberalization was made. It was done by the Social Democrats in both countries. And also, in general, stopping the growth of the welfare state or the public sector was a goal for the Swedish conservatives already in the late 1970s. But in Finland, the Conservative Party was more careful. They had a strong social liberal tradition, stronger than the Swedish one. And also, especially since the early 1970s, the Finnish conservatives wanted to gain a Soviet-friendly image and become fit for government again, because they were outside of government since 1966, because they were considered by President Kekkonen and other major parties, they were considered too anti-Soviet. So and they did not make it into government until 1987 again. But so during the economic crisis of the early 1990s, the conservatives were in government in both Sweden and Finland, and there was still quite a large difference in their ideology and policy. So in Sweden, the conservative government carried out many pretty ideologically motivated reforms, tax cuts, and for example, this introduction of school vouchers. So they made it possible to for-profit schools to compete for public money with public schools and with each other. So this is a reform that has been much debated, and it's a unique thing in the Nordic countries. This kind of that private schools are so plays such a big role in Sweden. So that was a reform purely made by the bourgeois government in the early 1990s, and it has been going on ever since. But in Finland, the Conservative Party, they were of course not the prime minister party during the depression, but they were still more moderate, at least in their rhetoric and ideology. They of course carried out lots of cuts in public spending and, for example, privatizations of state-owned enterprises. But they usually portrayed these kinds of measures as pragmatic and necessary, and not so much ideologically desirable. But from the early 1990s onwards, also explicitly neoliberal ideas gained a stronger position in the programs of the Finnish conservatives. For example, outsourcing and marketizing public services, which first appeared in the Finnish conservatives program in 1993. Yeah, well, these differences between the Finnish and Swedish parties are largely explained by the factors discussed already in the previous slide. But well, of course, one factor is also the Finnish tradition of coalition governments, where the conservatives have sometimes formed a government with the Social Democrats and sometimes with the Center Party. So they have not been able to be so confrontational as the Swedish conservatives, which have always competed against the Social Democrats and formed governments with the center and liberal parties in Sweden. And in the pictures, in the upper picture, that's from the election night of 1991 from Sweden. There's the leader of the Conservatives, Carl Bildt, who became prime minister on left, and on the right is a former leader of the party, Gösta Bohman. And then the lower picture is from the Finnish government formation negotiations from 1991. And there's Mauri Pekkarinen from Centre Party on the left and Iiro Viinanen from the Conservatives on the right, who became finance minister and had a very big role during the depression of the 1990s. And then a final theme that I have been studying in this, I'm already over time, so try to make this brief. But final theme is the small liberal Young Finns party in the 1990s and how they wanted to reform the welfare state. And this has already been published in the journal Contemporary European History. But so I think the Young Finns party is a good example of an explicitly neoliberal party whose ideas correspond quite well with the ideas of key neoliberal intellectuals like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and those kinds of fathers of neoliberalism. So the Young Finns entered parliament in 1995 with two MPs, Risto J. Penttilä and Jukka Tarkka, who are very well known even today, especially Penttilä, who is used a lot as a foreign policy commentator in media. But they wanted to implement radical tax, social security and labor market reforms, for example, flat rate tax and a small basic income or negative income tax as minimum social security, and getting rid of all earnings related social benefits, or making them voluntary and not funded by the state or the public sector. And they wanted to liberalize labor markets and get rid of the generally binding nature of collective labor market agreements. And they were also the first Finnish party to openly support NATO membership. And they got a lot of media attention and visibility for their ideas, but in the next election, 1999, they lost both their seats in parliament. But still, it seems that they managed to change the public discourse quite a lot and made it easier for other parties to also adopt these kind of neoliberal ideas. Okay, but I will end here and looking forward to the Q&A part. Thank you.